Okay, welcome everyone to this course in Flutter. I am Tobias Andersson Gidlund and I will be your guide through this. As this is a distance course and it's really a distance course, this will be the only live lecture that we are going to have, but we will interact in other ways during the summer. I think I'll start sharing my screen right away and we'll start looking at the content of today's lecture. And let's see, get the right one. And there we should be sharing and you should be seeing the introduction. I'll just pop up the right. Now it seems to be working. I have the chat open, so if you have any questions, you can, of course, shout right out if you like, but you could also possibly do a little wave in the chat, and I'll try to answer any questions that I can. And this is the introduction to app development with Flutter, and it's a course that's given for the first time, and it's given, as you know, as a summer course, which makes it possible for you to pace this any way that you'd like. This first lecture, as I said, will be the only one that's being live, and the rest of them are recorded. So what we are going to do today is to have an introduction. I wanted to say hi and give you a face and let you know about the basics of what we think of how this course should run. So we'll talk about communication. How are we going to communicate with each other? We are going to talk about the lectures themselves, and we are also going to have a little look at the assignments, or at least we are going to talk about the assignments. Then I will take this opportunity to give a little bit of a background to Flutter and Dart, which are the technologies that we are going to use in this course. I think that it is a good idea to really have a look at what's behind all of this and how it has come to where it is right now. So a little bit of history. We are not going to dwell on history for too long. It will be short, but it is important to know where things come from and why they look the way they do. I personally like Dart a lot, and that's one of the reasons why I have this course, but also because I think that it is a technology, a framework that's interesting to share with other people, and it deserves some attention. However, it is, of course, not the only way to do the things that Flutter does. Therefore, we're going to talk a little bit about other frameworks as well. Lastly, and that's just quite short, we will talk about getting up and running. There's so many ways of doing that because we have different platforms and so on, but there's also a lot of really nice documentation on how to getting up and running on all the different platforms. So I won't linger onto the details, but rather give you some pointers to where to look and how to try it out and so on. And if there are any problems, then we will, of course, help out in other ways. But from my point of view, there's a lot of stuff already out there trying to show you exactly how to install. So again, welcome. I would like to state very clearly that this is a course to give you a foundation when it comes to Flutter by looking at Dart and Flutter, because this Flutter framework is large, is really large. There's a lot of things you can do. There are a lot of packages, a lot of widgets to use. But we have to start somewhere, and we don't want it to be an overwhelming course either. After this course, there's still plenty more to learn, but when you have the foundation, it will hopefully not be too difficult to actually get up and running on those things. One of the constraints that we've put on this course is that we will focus on app development, that is for smartphones. However, Flutter is able to do much, much more than that. It has output targets for both desktop and web as well. However, the Android and iOS targets are the original ones, so the most developed ones and the ones that we think are the most important. Therefore, we will give an introduction to app development for smartphones. As I said in the beginning, this is a course that's completely on distance. So we need tools to communicate. We distribute information to you via our learning tool called Moodle or My Moodle. And most of you should already be enlisted on Moodle. If anyone has a problem getting to Moodle, then contact me or one of the TAs, that's teaching assistants, and we will help you out, of course. But it should actually be the case that everyone that's been able to register for the course should have access to Moodle. And there we will put a lot of information. I really, really recommend that you go there, because there you will find the links to the videos, and you will find the assignments and the project and so on. So please go there to get information that we want to push out to you. For discussions and for getting faster information, we will be using Slack. And we have a Slack instance on coursepress.slack.com. And you go there and you create an account using your LNU email address. Quite possibly, a lot of you have or could have accounts on some other Slack server somewhere, but you should not use that account. It's really important that you use one that has this @LNU or @student.lnu.se. Because only those will be allowed onto the CoursePress Slack. There, join the channel 1DB535 Flutter, because that's where we will be, me and the teaching assistants, to try to help you out and try to, well, discuss things with you if there are any questions or anything else. It's important that you get Slack up and running. It's sometimes a little bit difficult. I've been thrown into a circle of logins myself from time to time when trying to do this, but a little bit of persistence usually helps. Try to create the account, try to go to CoursePress again, possibly install the standalone client, and eventually it will work. Again, if it doesn't work, it's quite possible to contact us via email, for example, and we'll try to help out. But it is vital that you get access to Slack, because there is where we are going to help you the most. And we'll also put information that we want to get out quickly. You will also on Slack find a little bit on how to get help. There's a pinned post by me where I say exactly how you should post your questions. And that's by using emojis in order to to help us filter out and see exactly what we are up against, I was about to say, but what we are, where we are helping out, which ones have been helped, in what kind of help you need. We also get a message on Slack here to say, where we ask if assignment 1 is the activity control for this course. It is, but also as this is a summer course, we are not as forced to unregister you as we are for the courses that are in programs, for example. We fully expect that a number of students will not complete this course. And that's because that's the way it always is when it comes to summer courses. You have good intentions, been there, done that, and then there's summer, and then then things happen. So we will make any adjustments concerning how to work after having seen the interest in assignment 1, but we will not unregister people en masse. But as again, the most important thing, join Slack. All the lectures are pre-recorded, except this introduction, but it is being recorded, and I will put it on Moodle as soon as we are done. Everything is up now, and I am delighted to see that the first, getting started with Flutter video has already exceeded 100 views, and that was before course start. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but thank you very much for that. I also saw recently here that the last video in that series has 10 views, which is quite good for not even starting the course yet. So the lectures which are up there are divided into the parts that we are going to use in this course. They are deliberately fairly short to be fairly to the point on the topics. They pinpoint the most important parts of that topic, but you will need to read a little bit more. Sometimes I have links to interesting places where you can read more. Sometimes you just have to read the book or check things up. But for the most of the part, the most vital information is available in those lectures. When it comes to planning how to do this, that is both watching this and reading the book, is up to you. So you've got the summer, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the assignments, but you got the summer, and it's up to you to try to find time and do this. We are not going to say that week 1, you watched this video, week 2, you watched this video, and so on. The idea is basically that in a summer's course, you are more able to plan your work. And I mean, it's summer too, so from time to time, you need to do something else. It's quite hot, so maybe take a bath. We've tried to divide the material into the parts that are relevant for the assignments as well. And lastly, there will be a project. Talking about the book, it looks something like this. And to be honest, I picked one. I looked through it. I actually bought it and looked through it. And there are still parts that I'm not completely happy with, but it is a good enough book. Any recently written book should work because they mostly cover the same things. as far as I know, there are no books out yet that focuses on creating desktop application or web applications using Flutter. So most of them, if not all of them, are focusing on getting the basics or more advanced matters for that matter about this, about Flutter from an app point of view. What I do recommend is that you get hold of a book. We can't force you to buy a book, and we can't force you to buy a physical book, but we do recommend it. And the reason for that is that I've been teaching for a number of years, and the problem that a lot of students face when trying to get by without using the book or a book, any book, is that they get stuck on endless YouTube tutorials. They watch that video, that goes to that video, that goes to that video. Sometimes they're short, sometimes they're really, really long. But the problem is that when the code is only in a video, it's problematic from time to time to actually try it out. So therefore, start coding, buy a book and start coding. We also got some some questions in the chat, and I'll check. I was wondering if there are any requirements on how the code is written and file structure. Well, Flutter will make that obvious for you. As soon as you create a Flutter project, you will get a structure. Is there any way we could get feedback on the hand-ins projects before the deadlines? No, you won't get, because that would be correcting them twice. Will we answer questions on specific things that you have questions for each assignment? Yes, of course. So if you ask, for example, is this a good way to do a state transition from one screen to another? We will, of course, answer that, but we will not look at the entire assignment and assessing it before handing it in. Regarding the course literature, pages to read are mentioned, but you want headings and whether first or second edition. Well, we could do that, but to be honest, it's just 300 pages in the book. So of the 500 that you are going to look at. So I'd say it's fair that you read those 300 pages. It's not that much. Also, the way I usually do it is to have a look at the topic at hand. If we have an lecture on, say, layouts, there's almost certainly, or I know it, there will be a part in the book concerning layouts. So have a look at the topic and the corresponding pages in the book. The book also mentions stuff a little bit here and there. So reading the book, basically the 300 first pages, 280 or 90 pages, something, I think, is good. It won't do you any harm. Lastly, right now at least, but keep the questions coming. Will there be a written examination in the end? No. So you will have 2 assignments and a project, and that's it. Moving on, the overall plan. Well, we are going to have this introduction, and then everything else, as I said, will be YouTube videos that are already up there for creating the first Flutter app, an introduction to Dart, using layouts, state, navigation, and lastly, miscellaneous widgets. And that's basically it. When it comes to these parts, each part could have several smaller lectures on YouTube. So, for example, Dart is for for first the foundations of Dart and then for object orientation in Dart. I should also say that, and I will post this a little bit more when we get up and running, the chapter about states in the book is still using kind of an older way of doing it, while I try to do a newer, more modern way of doing states in the lecture notes and in the YouTube clips. Navigation should work right off, and all the other parts should just work. We also get a question about if the projects are individual or as a group, and they are individual. It's basically a larger, well, we'll get to that on the next slide, actually. Here it is. So 2 assignments and 1 project. And all of them are done individually. The first assignment is to create something that looks like an identification app, an image of you and some text, and we are basically looking at how to work with Flutter and getting some layout up. It doesn't have to be fancy, and to be honest, you don't have to use an image of yourself. You could use the king or anyone else, but I think it's more fun if you actually use an image of yourself and not your dog or anything else. But that's up to you. The important thing is to work with and understand how the basics work for Flutter. The second one will have to do with states. State management is a big thing when it comes to, well, basically any language, but not the least in Flutter, as it's not really working the way that a lot of other older frameworks are working. So therefore, we will have 1 assignment, which is about state management. We'll have things added to a list and also removed from the list. More information on both of these is available on Moodle. So you can check them out, and you can actually hand them in already if you like. We will not check them until the deadline, but you can hand them in if you like. These 2 assignments are just pass or fail. The project, however, has a larger scope and will be graded A to F. And the project, still individual, is about creating a weather app of some sort. And depending on how, well, perhaps not good looking, but how much you implement into this weather app, you will get a better grade. This is also available, and we've specified what you need to do for the different steps, so that you can see exactly what you should aim for if you want to go for an A or for a C or an E, for example. But the idea here is to create a weather app that fetches data and it displays this data in some way. It will also then incorporate state management, and it will be using navigation, because you will be able to, must be able to jump between 2 different screens and so on. For, let's see, we have 2 more questions. When do you recommend we start the assignments? I would say that it is fairly obvious when looking through the list of videos. When we are done with layouts, it's a good time to do assignment 1. When we are done with states, it's a good time to do the second one. with state management. And then when we're done with all of it, it's a good idea to do the weather app. We also get a question concerning the API key. Well, we could, you don't have to provide an API key. We could substitute that with something that we have instead. So that's basically it when it comes to the assignments. 2 assignments, and they are pass or fail, and 1 project, still individual, A to F. I talk about us a lot, that we will be helping you out, which is the basic idea. And we, well, that's primarily the teaching assistants, Ingmar Falk, Sandro, Alia, and Richard. And they will help you on Slack. And you can see their Slack names over here as well. And they are available to help you right now in this specific Slack channel. We will also later on post a number of specific times when they will be available, but you can always ask questions on Slack. And if you follow the instructions, you will see exactly how you should do that in order to get the best of help. All right. Another question, is there a second and third chance to submit the assignments? Yeah, I forgot about the dates. There are dates for the assignments. We can just go back to seeing them again. There are dates which you should hand in the first assignment, the second assignment, and they are kind of strict. So you need to hand them in by those dates. I don't remember them right now. And if I look it up, everything will go bananas over here. But that's available on Moodle. And then we have the project, which actually has 2 deadlines. A soft deadline, which is the end of the course. And then that's the August 13th. As that is how long the course is really supposed to be continuing. However, I wanted to give you some more time if you like to do that. So there is a hard deadline a week later, basically, where you can also hand it in, and that will not affect the grade. It's just that we need to follow the specific ranges of the summer course, and it should end the 13th of August. But you'll get some more time there if you like. If you fail to hand in at these dates, then there is 1 re-examination date, which is September 1st, when you can hand everything in again. We will not have a third chance in this summer course. We need to have a first and a second chance, but the third chance will be if this course will be running next year again. So those are primarily the dates, and you can see the exact dates on Moodle as well. Concerning handing in, there is one thing that I want you to really have a look at, namely to clean up your project before handing it in. You are going to hand it in via Moodle. For those of you who have been studying with us before, then we usually use a Git tool in order to work with hand-ins for different courses. However, that will be too much administration for this course. Therefore, we will be looking at Moodle for doing this instead. So in order to do that, because these Flutter projects, they will become fairly large fairly quickly. And therefore, you need to remove all the, for example, all the packages that are downloaded or all the bin files and so on, so that only the bare necessities are left. And you do that by running Flutter Clean. You can do that on the command line using Flutter Clean. If you use Android Studio, you go to Tools, Flutter, and Flutter Clean. If you use VS Code, you use Control-Shift-P in order to get this little command palette, and you just type Flutter Clean and it will pop out, and it will remove a lot of, should we say, dead weight in order to get that down. But as I said, that will also remove packages that you've downloaded, for example. So if you want to run your code again after that, you need to download the packages again by just making a Flutterpub get, for example, or pressing the relevant buttons in either Android Studio or VS Code. If anyone has any problems with that, we are happy to help you out in Slack. But the important thing is that you actually do a clean. Sorry, wrong window. And also compress the file so that what you send in is something that is a lot smaller than the project itself. So compress it to a zip file in either Windows, Mac, or Linux way. If you have any problems with this, again, you contact us and we will help you on Slack. All right. Any specific questions when it comes to the assignments that we haven't looked at yet? Anything you think? We'll get to the ID. We got a question about ID, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. And so we'll take that when we get that. All right, let the questions continue. Will we use Git in some way? No, we don't use Git at all in this course because we have so many students that are from other places than Linnaeus University, where we've had the time to work with this with the students. So therefore, we will only hand in via Moodle in this course. Good. Let's move on to Flutter. Nice. Which is, of course, the idea of this course. And yeah, there were a few things that came in. Size limit in Moodle, and we got a answer 512 megabytes. And just for reference, the weather app that I created before I did a Flutter clean on that, it was 380 something megabytes. So with the Flutter clean and then a zip, it will be no worries. All right, what is Flutter then? Well, it's an open source UI framework. So important here is that it is actually designed to create the UI for mobile apps to begin with, and later on web apps and desktop programs. It is multi-platform, and the idea is that from a single code base, we could export out to any of the targets. And this has grown during the existence of Flutter. Flutter itself is created and maintained by Google. And that's important to remember. There is a very large company behind this, but it's also important to remember that it is a very large company behind this. They take the help of a lot of community developers as well. So even though Google's and the Flutter team stands for a lot of the packages available. So there's also a number of things that you get from the community that's really well maintained. It was Flutter that is released in 2015, so not that long ago, I would say. Latest version is 3.10 dot something. I think it's 2. I have 3.10.2 and it doesn't tell me to upgrade, so it seems to be something like that. First stable version in 2018, and version 2 was released in 2021, which did include some breaking changes. And in early 2022, we got version 3, which is the version branch that we are on right now. And the important thing really with version 3 was that it made it so that there are now 6 target platforms: Android, iOS, web, Linux, macOS, and Windows. So from one code base, you could potentially create for all of these platforms. It's not that easy for all of them. So for example, it's not possible from for example, a Linux machine to create a iOS app. However, as long as you have an Apple machine, you can do that, and you're still able to use the same code base, more or less. But as always, when you're targeting many different platforms with one code base, there will actually be some changes. So the web doesn't work the same way as a desktop application, for example. But it is possible to target any of these platforms at least. And is anyone using Flutter, or is it just ticking up the version numbers? Well, Google themselves are, of course, using Flutter. They've tried it in a number of apps, like the latest version of Google Pay and the Google Classroom app for mobile, and a number of other different apps as well. The first time we saw anything that featured this made in Flutter was the Hamilton app for the musical of the same name, and they made a big thing of that. So if you search YouTube for Hamilton and Flutter, you will get some cool videos of that from not that long ago. But we can also see that companies like BMW, Toyota, Abbey Road Studios, eBay Motors, and so on use Flutter for their apps. And they have a steady increase in the number of apps in especially the Google Play Store, where a lot of these applications end up. Also, for those of us who run Ubuntu Linux, we know that Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu, recently rewrote the installer for the operating system using Flutter. So I would say that there's a lot of stuff happening around Flutter, and it is being used more and more. And if we look at the Flutter architecture, it's basically 3 major parts. We have the framework, which is a visible part, which is made in Dart, which is a programming language, and we'll get there. It is the part that we are going to use, basically. But in order to make this as extensible and flexible as possible, we have beneath the framework also an engine and then an embedder, where the engine is a core of Flutter, mostly written in C and C++. And then we have the embedder for the specific platforms with the access then to the underlying OS, which will be different depending on which target you actually develop for. And the idea here, and that's actually what they've done, they've looked at these layers and they've added and replaced parts of it in order to be able to target more platforms. So when it comes to targeting the web, for example, they changed the embedder so that it then speaks web instead of speaking Android and so on. As I said at the top, we have the framework layer, which is where we are going to be. So we can think of this as Flutter for us. It handles everything that has to do with the painting, the animations, the widget trees, how to build the UI, everything that we are working with when it comes to the Flutter apps. It's also here that we decide whether we want a Material or Cupertino library to do the UI for us or anything else, because there are alternatives out there. And basically, Material and Cupertino are the design languages for Android and iOS, respectively. And this is the way everything is rendered on the device. But if we go one level below that, we have the engine level, which implements the primitives for Flutter. So this is where we see how text really is handled, how buttons can be drawn, how lines can be drawn on a specific device. And here they leverage the library called Skia, a graphics library, a rather low-level graphics library that works on basically pixel level with GPU acceleration, which is important because we want our applications to run as fast as possible. And Skia is a graphics library that's been used for a long time. It's also the foundation for Chrome and for Firefox and a number of other fairly large projects that use graphics. But as it is a general graphics library, they have now started to look at replacing this with something they call Impeller, which is more specifically designed for Flutter and also optimized for Flutter's use cases rather than being a generic or general graphics library. It should be possible if you jump onto a beta channel to get Impeller for iOS. Android is in the works, but not done. At least it's not done so that it is available to the public, but close to. And then we'll see what happens with the other platforms. But there's a lot of things happening in this engine layer right now. And that's cool. And lastly, we have the embedded layer, which makes this a native application for the platform. They are currently working really, really hard with the embedders, especially for web. They are trying out to making all of it WASM, so basically WebAssembly, instead of having a lot of boilerplate HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and so on. But for the other platforms, we have embedders written for the languages that are most suitable for the platform. So Java, C, or C++ for Android, Objective-C for iOS and macOS, and C++ for the desktops. But we are mainly concerned with the app development. However, it is important to remember that the idea here is to compile it to as native as possible on the platform so that we get the highest speed possible. So there are no real, say, compatibility layers in between that. It sucks a lot of processing power from us. And it's possible to provide additional embedders if needed. And that's something that they will probably do in the future in order to target other platforms. But we are mainly working, as I said, on the top level, where we talk about what's called widgets, or from the beginning, window gadgets, which are all of these parts that we see in a Flutter app. And that means basically everything. So all the buttons, all the text, the graphics, the drop-down boxes, the ability to drag stuff, to work with the camera, whatever it might be, is a widget. So we put it on the screen and it gives us something, and we can work with that widget in order to do what we want to do. Even the layout of things, where to put things, if we want to put things in a row or a column or in a grid, everything is a widget. So what we do is to put widgets, in widgets, in widgets, and in widgets, and so on, to construct our user interface. And even though that might sound difficult, Flutter is created for this. And as time has gone by, Dart has also then been optimized, to do work like this. So that means that all of these parts are highly optimized for working in this what's called pseudo-declarative way of putting things in trees in the background and then updating just the parts that we need to update and so on. And we're not relying on anything on the platform itself when it comes to buttons, text, and so on. All of that is done by the different layers beneath the top one, and then optimized for the platform when we get there. As I said, Flutter is pseudo-declarative, meaning that we state what the UI should look like rather than how to work with the UI. And you'll see more about that when you get to both the layouts specifically, but also the states. It's also reactive, which means that it kind of reacts to things happening. And that combination of being declarative and reactive means that the UI and the states are decoupled. And that makes things quite, let's say, it makes things work efficiently if you keep everything divided in this way. So what happens is that the UI is internally created as a tree, and Flutter then has really optimized algorithms then to traverse this tree and only update specific parts of the user interface, those that have reacted to, for example, state. And as Dart and Flutter are developed together, this is done in a way that makes it highly optimized, as I said, for this. And this way of being able to walk down or traverse the tree to find parts of the UI to update also is a foundation of the next thing, which is one of the killer features for Flutter, namely hot reload. So anyone who has ever done something like app development or development of a say, desktop application knows that the compiling, running, and testing cycle can be fairly slow. And when working with apps, you need to have a smartphone emulator or simulator. It's called an emulator on Windows and Linux, and it's called a simulator on macOS. Just starting this up takes time, and then compiling would take a lot of time. But as Dart and Flutter are highly optimized to just update parts of the GUI. We can do these hot reloads, which basically means that we only update the parts that are changed. And that means that we can make updates to the application and maintain state. So even if we do a cool new feature and we've added some data, then we can update fairly quickly and see the results. So this makes working with Flutter and developing Flutter really, really nice, I would say. It's fast to do. There are a few instances if we make large changes to state or if we have compilation errors and so on, then we will have to do a restart. But most of the time we can get by without making large changes, without making a real restart of the application. So a few good things about Flutter. It's high level, fairly easy, and if you're good at it, you will be able to create good-looking user interfaces. I like Flutter for the ideas that they have, but unfortunately, I'm not much of a graphical designer myself, so that means stealing stuff from others. But it is possible to create really good-looking interfaces with a lot of animations, and it's going to be fluent and so on. In addition to that, it has a vast library of packages to help you out. For example, for animations or for fonts or opening URLs, fetching data, getting geolocation, all of that stuff. It's available on pub.dev, which is the package list for all of this, and we'll go through that in the lectures that are available. It also has a great community and solid support for Google. And I will leave it with the good things for now, but we will return shortly and talk a little bit about what could potentially be problematic with Flutter, because nothing is always great. There's also cons with this. But before we do that, we are going to look a little bit at Dart, which is the underlying programming language. So we basically have Flutter, which is a framework. And in order to program that, we use a specific programming language called Dart, which, as I've said, is created nowadays for Flutter. But that wasn't always the case. So first off, it was developed by two Danish computer scientists, and they at the time worked at Google. They have since left Google and started a new company, and they have a new programming language called Toit or something like that. I haven't really looked it up. It's another programming language. You can never have too many programming languages. The first version of Dart was developed as a replacement for JavaScript. That was the idea. That was how I got in contact with Dart in the first place, doing web programming stuff or lectures on web programming. And well, as you saw in the beginning, I don't have much hair anymore on my head, but the little I had, I removed when working with JavaScript, basically. So I wanted something, anything, whatever, instead of JavaScript. And then Dart popped up, and for a while, Google even created a special version of Chrome called Dartium, which natively ran Dart code instead of JavaScript code in the web browser. It never really took off. So it's discontinued for a really long time. However, the idea of having something instead of JavaScript also had the impact of the language being very much like JavaScript, but without some of the lesser good parts. So it is object-oriented, and it has a C-like syntax. And anyone who has any experience in Java, C#, C++, or JavaScript, you will feel right at home in Dart. First, it looks like a language that is, yeah, well, kind of Java-like, but with less syntactic sugar. And the more you look at it, the more you see that there are a bunch of things that are really, really well thought through in the language. It was first shown in 2011 and released in 2013. And already in 2015, they dropped this trying to replace JavaScript idea, because it's quite simply not possible to replace JavaScript. But here somewhere I got the idea of it, and they also had a version of Angular called Angular Dart, which was something that I worked on for a while. They dropped that too, actually. But what they did later on was to see if they could use this language for something else, and that meant to transition the language away from JavaScript. So in version 2 in 2018, we saw a very strict type system in Dart. So slowly, but really steadily, it evolved into a language that's optimized for Flutter. And that means a lot of cool things, a lot of strange things. For example, you don't need the keyword new for creating objects in Flutter. And that's basically because in Flutter, we have, every time we want to create a widget, we actually create an object of a class, and that meant saying new. And as the UI is composed of widgets in widgets in widgets in widgets, there were a lot of new in the code. So they dropped that. From a comprehension point of view, that might not be a good idea, but from an efficiency point of view, it's great. And it also makes Flutter look even more declarative than it did before. And who really wants to type new all the time? In addition to that, they've introduced sound null safety, basically meaning that you cannot create values that can be null unless you specifically state that this variable or object then can be null. And this was done in order to catch errors as soon as possible, to make the code as clean and safe as possible. This transition was commenced with Dart 2.12 and is now mandatory in Dart 3. And the reason I say it like this is that Dart 3 was released not very long ago. They also added a few more things in Dart 3 that forced me to update my lecture notes, because they added cool new features and changed things that weren't possible before. But I would say that these are the great things. And on top of that, they, as any language today, take in things from other programming languages, like isolates from Erlang for concurrency. We are not going to look very much into that, but isolates makes it really simple to create isolated islands of code that you call, and concurrency, that's the possibility to run them at the same time, is handled by the framework in a really nifty way. Mixin from Strongtalk in Ruby where we are able to share methods between classes. We are not going to look at that either. But basically a way to not be very object-oriented, but rather sharing stuff between different classes. Good or bad? Well, they're here if you want to use. And method cascading, to have several methods applied to one object, and not necessarily to the result of that object, but to the object itself. And it also has a number of core libraries, and basically everything that you need to know about third-party libraries are available at pub.dev. But the important thing here is that Dart and Flutter work together. Dart is a familiar language, as it looks kind of like JavaScript or Java, C++, C#. It takes from all of these languages and it tries to make something that's better. That's always objective, but I would say it is better. And Flutter has had an impact on Dart, and Dart is adjusted so that it is as efficient as possible for Flutter. Google went with Dart for Flutter just because of that. It controls both parts. Those of you who are into Android development on a well, not using Flutter, namely using Java instead, well, you probably know that Java is not a Google language. It's basically out of Google's hand, so they can't really adjust it the ways that they want for Android to be as efficient as they want. But with Dart and Flutter, they are able. And that raises the question if Dart and Flutter ever will replace Java and Android as we know it, and it's possible. They've made devices running Dart and Flutter instead of Android, but I would be very surprised if this happens anytime soon. Is this a dangerous combination? Well, of course, we have a large company who has absolute control. Not really good in all cases, but they are still open source. You can find the source code to both Dart and Flutter, and they've created a really large community around this. So for the time being, it should be fine. But you'll also seen the meme of the burning apartment. This is fine. So we don't know, but it should be fine. So alternatives to all of this. Could this be done in any other way? Of course. As I've said, the idea of using Flutter is to have one code base and then compile it to basically as many platforms as we can. In this case, we are mainly going to talk about the Android and iOS, because that was the beginning also for Flutter. And this has been done several times. We have React Native, for example, from Meta Platforms or Facebook, that uses the React framework, which is something similar, but well, it's used a lot, yes, but it has some stability and compatibility problems with it as well, which is, of course, one of the reasons why something else pops up. We have Apache Cordova, previously known as PhoneGap, which is basically a number of web technologies with some integration with the platform that it is running on, but it is slower than the native solutions, so therefore maybe not used, but it is a way of doing basically the same. Xamarin, Well, it's today a Microsoft-owned C# and .NET solution that is in the process of being superseded by .NET MAUI, which is something very, very similar to what Flutter is actually doing. So this one, .NET MAUI, is something to watch out for. Being from Microsoft, it has a kind of tilt towards Windows and Microsoft technologies when it comes to development, but the targets are multiple platforms. But this one you should really have a look at. And then there are a number of web-like technologies like NativeScript, and well, there's a bunch of them that you could use instead of using Flutter, which makes it more or less the same thing. And then we also always have the possibility of going native, which of course is the most often the best way if you want to utilize everything that that specific platform can give you. This means Java then for Android, and it means Swift or possibly Objective-C for iOS. And you know then that you get the features that are available on that platform because they were developed for this specific native solution. But this then means that if you want to develop an app, you will have two really different code bases that you need to maintain. So you basically will have one Android app and you will have one iOS app. And they will be very different. I've heard using Flutter that even though they need from time to time to make adjustment for the different platforms, you could expect something like 85% the same code if using Flutter between the Android and the iOS app, whereas this means that you have very little overlapping code. So this one depends on if you have the resources to do it, basically. But it is a possibility. And is there anything that's kind of bad with Flutter? Of course. I mean, it's if it was the case that Flutter is a solution to all the world's problems, then everyone would be using Flutter right now. But it isn't. We have apps being quite large, being one problem. We have Dart, which I would say is a really good language, but it's not that popular yet, I would say. I say yet, because I'd really like it to be popular. It's not difficult to pick up. So we'll see. It depends also on what Google will be doing with all of this later on. There are still some problems with especially iOS to get everything running smoothly, and that's the reason why they are switching from Skia to the Impeller graphics engine on iOS. iOS development is more difficult as it is a more closed garden, so to say. So it's difficult to get in there and making things that are really easy to work with and optimized for that operating system. And there are a lot of third-party libraries available for Flutter, but they are nowhere near anything like the big ones that have been available for forever. And I mean, it's also, of course, possible to create mobile apps by doing a web app which is responsive and has a UI for a mobile phone as well, for example. So and there you have so many third-party libraries and so many possibilities. Things are, however, looking good for Flutter. It is actively developed. There was just a month ago, perhaps, during Google I/O, a large feature drop where they dropped Dart 3 and Flutter 3.10 then. So they do this at numerous times whenever they have something new to do. They have a FlutterCon conference, which I usually look at once a year, and then they have other smaller conferences concerning Flutter around the year where they drop new things. So I'd say that it is actively developed. So we are looking forward to the future. Now, getting started. And I would say, follow the Flutter installation guide. And it is really well detailed. If you find it difficult, search YouTube for your specific setup, and there are loads of setting up tutorials available. As I said initially, I don't want you to get stuck on YouTube, because you might never leave again. But if you have problems with this, find a guide that guides you through this. Of course, contact us if it really doesn't work. Instructions in the installation guide, they are available for all major platforms. So that is Linux, macOS, and Windows. And it's also available for several IDEs. I would recommend Visual Studio Code, but that's my preference. They also have in-depth guides to Android Studio, which was the original way of doing it, and that works just as well. We have a comment in the chat saying that Android Studio is really slow. Yeah, well, it's not the fastest program in the world, agreed, but it is still possible to work with. If you have no idea, never used Visual Studio Code, I would perhaps use Android Studio instead, because I would say that it is a little bit more beginners friendly than Visual Studio Code. Android Studio is also developed for Android and Flutter development. Flutter is still a plugin for Android Studio, but it does have a tight integration, whereas Visual Studio Code is more of a general programmer's tool where you can add stuff and it will work. And I've done all my development the last 2 years at least when it comes to Flutter on Visual Studio Code, and it just works. TM. There's a lot of instructions. They're kind of comprehensive. There's a lot of things to do. However, don't panic. Follow the instructions. Read them and have a look at the YouTube videos available for these specific things. And when it doesn't work, contact us. We are available on Slack. We will help you. We want you to get this up and running. It does work on most on most platforms without much problem nowadays. The first, well, Flutter 1.x versions, it was a hassle to get up and running. Nowadays, it's a lot easier, but there are a bunch of things to do. Take it easy. Don't panic. Read the instructions. Read them again. Follow a YouTube tutorial if you get stuck, and then ask us for help. And when you've done everything, the first thing you should do is to run the example application, a basic application where you press a little floating action button down at the right corner, and every time you do, there is a counter counting upwards. In order to do this, you need to install. either way, you need to and should install Android Studio, because with that you get all the things that has to do with the emulator or possibly simulator, and that helps out a lot. And then later on you can work in Visual Studio. There are steps for how to create this emulator that you need, because that's basically an emulated mobile phone. You just pick one. I usually go for the latest Pixel device that they have. They have I think I use the Pixel 6 XL in my examples. And what you need to make sure is that you get this up and running so that you're not targeting web or desktop. That's basically the important thing. So by following the instructions, you will also then create a emulator of a phone and start that, especially if you run Visual Studio Code. Start that before you start trying to run your application in Visual Studio Code. It's a little bit more integrated when you do it in Android Studio. Initial run can be very, very slow, but once you get up and running, it should be working okay-ish. This is something of what it looks like when you are running it on my machine. You will not be running this on my machine, but I am. It will look similar. On the right, you see a mobile phone, and it is running in a window, and you can see the gray bar to the right of it where you can turn it off, you can put it in landscape and so on. It's basically a software phone. And in Visual Studio Code, which I'm using here, you can see that we have the code running. This is the example code. I'm here running. Over here, if you can see my mouse pointer, you can see that we have a little control panel for starting and debugging. You just press over here to start it, and if you have this up and running, the emulator, then you get this up when you press the run button over here. And then you have restart and hot reload and so on, which you can use in order to restart the application or just hot reload. Usually just press Control S or Command S to save the application, and it will hot reload itself. But this is something that you need to get when you get this up and running. When this works, you know that you have all the foundations up and running. And if you want to use Android Studio instead, it looks like this. You can pop out the emulator over here. If you, like me, have several screens, you can just pop this out and put it on another screen, which is usually what I do. But you can also see that it is a little bit more integrated. It's easier here to see what we are running on, and we have a play icon and the rest of the stuff, which is fairly similar. Whichever you use, it's up to you. If you've never used Visual Studio Code, I would probably go for Android Studio, but if you're comfortable in Visual Studio Code, go for that one. Mix and match. Try out the other one, but don't get stuck too long, because you need to progress through the course as well. And that actually brings us to the last slide, because I totally forgot that we might need a break. You don't get a break now because this is the last slide. Get Flutter working. That's the most important thing. Also, get Slack working. That might be even more crucial. If you don't get Flutter working, you most often contact us on Slack, as I said previously. But now, if you haven't already, start getting Flutter to work. Download it, install it, follow the instructions, and get the example program up and running. Get the book, or I could say get a book. I wholeheartedly recommend that you have something to guide you through this. It doesn't have to be the book that we recommend, but it's good, so why not? If you have something else, if you're uncertain, if a book is relevant, then ask me and I'll check. I know, for example, that there are books about game programming in Flutter, and that might not be a good start. But anything else will probably work fine. Experiment, start out, do stuff, because you don't want to get to the last point, namely to get stuck on YouTube. There's loads of stuff on YouTube. There are tutorials that are hundreds of hours long, but if you don't stop somewhere and actually do some coding, you will never get through. You will never learn anything. I've looked at a number of these tutorials, at least parts of them, and some of them are really, really good. So I'm not saying that they are bad and you shouldn't look at them because of that. However, it's so easy to get stuck there on YouTube. So read a book, experiment. But with that, I will force you to have a look at me instead. Hello there. And that's basically it from my point of view. So if you have any more questions, keep them coming for a little while more, and I'll try to answer. Other than that, I can see you are starting to drop out. That's okay too, if you want to. I won't keep you. I already got paid for this, so. The next time we'll meet is on Slack. That's where we talk. We got a question. For the weather app, does it have to be actual geopositioning from a phone emulator? Well, the good thing with the phone emulator is that it is really easy, and we'll show you that in the last lecture. It's really easy to just say that this emulator is in City Växjö, for example, and to pinpoint it to any specific GPS coordinates. Yeah, you will use positioning, but you will do that through the emulator. Do you have an example of the weather app? Well, if you have a look at the Moodle page with the project instructions, I've actually created the application, so you can have a look at it over there. There are screenshots of it. It's not much more than the stuff that you see. So if you really, really want, I could record when I'm using it, but it's not that much fun. I have it on my phone as well, so I just use it from time to time. But to be honest, the Google one is way better. Let's see, do we get grades as soon as we finish the assignments? We will try to give you grades as soon as we possibly can. So the idea is that we will give you the grades when the assignments are corrected. And we got a link for getting started for Windows, but you have all that from the Docs Flutter Dev website, which we linked from the lecture notes. So just follow that link, and if you have something else, like Linux, for example, just follow those instructions as well. And further questions, if you have them, you can send them to us on Slack. And as always, most often, if you have a question, bets are that someone else has the same question. So please Put as many questions as you possibly can in Slack so that everyone can see them. Okay. Everyone is now either longing to get out in the sun or judging by the people who are still here but not saying anything, possibly already out in the sun. Do we specify which grade we are trying to get? Well, for the project, you have a number of levels of the stuff that we want you to create for a specific level. So you do it by implementing the stuff on that level that you want to reach. The only thing is that the A level, if you want an A grade, you need to kind of dazzle us with your creativity. But you'll see more or less exactly what you need to implement in order to get a grade. Will there be more Flutter courses in the future? Well, it depends. If this goes well, I'd like to have more Flutter courses, but it always depends on how well this goes. So please do well. Thank you. How do you guys run our code? Well, paths to images and so on follow the instructions that we give, because this is a fairly well-contained environment. So if you put things in the image directory and you update the pubspec YAML file to point to that one, then it will work. So follow the instructions. Do I have any advanced resources for Flutter on animations and so on? I don't have. There's, of course, the things that are available on the Flutter documentation, and I have some links to interesting places that I think maybe not that advanced, but that can take you to places. There are a number of code labs, for example, for Flutter that are really interesting, that you could have a look at when it comes to getting together more advanced applications. Is the Xcode simulator a good alternative? Probably. I've never really used a Mac, but if you follow the instructions, and I would say that most Mac users, as far as I understand it, use the Xcode simulator rather than whatever you get, the emulator, than in Android Studio. So I would say yes, but I have yet to work with a Mac. Right. Will we be handing in any sketches of the UI in Figma or Adobe XD? No, you don't have to. The proof is in the code right now. And now I can see Sando down at the corner. Could you wave to the audience? Great. Let's see if any of the others are available. No. But yeah, he's one of the TAs. All right. I think I will let you off this misery now and let you start coding instead. Best of luck to all of you, and we'll meet again on Slack. Bye-bye. Thanks very much for this. Bye-bye.